We are born into stories that begin before us, narratives shaped by familial ties, social structures, and history we never agreed to inherit. We call these harsh realities that cannot be shaken fate, but fate is just another word for the systems we're born into without control, judged not by who we are, but by the circumstances that surround us, our parents, our wealth, the marks both physical and invisible placed on us at birth. It's easy to believe there's no way out, that our path has already been written, our roles in life carved into stone. But just when the weight of that truth feels unbearable, a light appears, a chance, a reminder that even the cruelest fates can be rewritten, not through anger or resentment, but through love. The kind that gives without reward, sacrifices without recognition, and lives only to set someone else free. This is what the Penguindrum always was. But to truly understand its significance, we must understand those shaped by its existence. This is making sense of Mawaru Penguindrum. In the early morning of March 20th, 1995, 5 men boarded separate trains on the Tokyo subway system, each carrying a bag of sarin gas, a lethal chemical weapon. As rush hour traffic surged, they punctured the bags with umbrella tips and exited. What followed was one of the most horrifying acts of domestic terrorism in Japanese history. The Tokyo subway sarin gas attacks, carried out by the cult Shinrikyo, killed 13 people, injured over 6,000, and left a scar on the nation's psyche that never fully healed. The perpetrators weren't foreign enemies. They were Japanese citizens, some highly educated, driven by an apocalyptic ideology that saw mass death as a path to salvation. In the years that followed, Japan would grapple with a horrifying realization that extremism could come from within, and that children could inherit the shame of a past they had no part in. Thus, the story of Mawaru Penguindrum is seeded. The series never names the event directly, but the shadow of 1995 looms over the narrative, as well as the terrorist at hand. The Kiga group, while inspired by in structure and aesthetic, diverges in its ideology. Was apocalyptic, driven by a twisted desire to purify the world and ascend spiritually. But Kiga's motivations are bound by a sense of nihilism. They do not seek transcendence, but erasure. It's an answer to a broken system, one that allows children to be discarded and forgotten. They don't seek to remake the world in a better image. They want to erase the machine entirely, to obliterate the very existence of a world that could let children go unchosen. This shift in the attack's motivation is crucial, because Penguindrum isn't about violence in itself. It's about what comes after, the emotional fallout, the children left behind, the unloved, the unseen, and the ones deemed unnecessary. It asks of you, if we're born from tragedy, are we destined to repeat it? Or can we somehow break this cycle? While some may see a path forward in liberating oneself of vengeance, Sanetoshi Watase does not see such a future. The pink-haired leader's ideology is the spiritual foundation of the Kiga group. Under his influence, the organization turns inward, shedding any utopian visions and embracing the bleak reality that becomes inescapable. The world's systems have failed the children. Thus, if the world cannot be fixed, then it must be ended. There is a contradiction at the heart of the Kiga's group ideology. They claim to fight to avenge the forgotten, to collect repayment for the children discarded by a cruel world. But in choosing destruction as their answer, they doom those very children to inherit nothing. No future, no healing. In trying to reject a broken system, they become a mirror of it, perpetuating the same cycle of abandonment they sought to end. The only thing left behind for the children, after they're done, is the inheritance of the sins of their caretakers. But Kiga does not stand unchallenged in their flawed ideals. There once was a girl who stood at the same intersection of fate and despair. She, like Sanetoshi, born aware of this broken system, but instead of choosing to seed back into it hatred and anger, she chose a path of love and sacrifice. Her answer to Sanetoshi's aspiration to transfer the pain within his conscience outward was to absorb the sorrow of others. Where he condemned the world for its cruelty, she tried to rewrite it through trading her own future for the future of others. That is sacrifice, love unconditional, Sanetoshi represents a world where pain breeds more pain, a karmic cycle of destruction. Momoka offers a alternative view, one where love, when given without strings attached, can sever that spiral of pain. Her presence in the story seems small at first, but her legacy echoes through every act of compassion that follows. Though Sanetoshi would be successful in the act of terror on the society of Japan, Momoka's ideology would persevere by rewriting fate, an act that would take her life alongside Sanetoshi's, saving hundreds. But the man would not go out in silence. He cursed the girl, weakening her magical spell to only be half as effective, in turn splitting both of their souls in half. Part of each would still hold agency in this world, though it could only be through others that their fight could continue. And so the endless battle of nihilism against humanism continues through the surviving agents of this story. The effects of the terrorist attack still influence the lives of many, namely in this case through the death of Momoka, seeding trauma into the lives of Yuri Tabuki and her newly born sister Ringo, and with the arrests and deaths among the Kika group, causing displacement of the very children they acted in mind of. The Takakura's selfish act of causing destruction as co-inspirers, doing so in the belief they were acting out of compassion and love for the unchosen children, left their adopted kids Himari, Kanba, and Shouma with the unbearable inheritance of their parents' sin. Whether a survivor of a victim or a survivor of the assailants, each battles with the burden of existence, of how to move forward in a world so different from what they once knew. The ones affected by Momoka's death are left to ponder the reason they were chosen to live when their friend was not. This idea lives on in Keiju Tabuki and Yuri Tokikago, both children disregarded in an indifferent world. Tabuki was nearly incinerated from existence, a child judged to be unnecessary, who is sent to this world's metaphor for the social machinery that discards children who are unloved, abused, poor, or deemed inconvenient. In real-world terms, it's the orphanages that forget, the families that abandon, the schools that label, and the communities that ignore. Here in Penguindrum, society's indifference to child suffering created the child broiler, a metaphorical void where unloved children are erased from this world. The children that find themselves here walk into non-existence willingly, believing the words spoken to them by their parents and caretakers, that they have no value. That absence of love from the ones who brought them life becomes internalized. For children, it becomes a reflection of their own worth. Without that foundational affirmation, they begin to believe they're unwanted, broken, and disposable. Thus, the message in their mind is clear. If even those who created me can't love me, then I must not deserve love at all. They were not chosen by society or by family, and without someone to declare their existence valid, their lives may as well end here. But all these children need is someone to tell them they matter, that they are loved. For Tabuki, that person was Momoka, a rarity of somebody with compassion, someone who saves this boy from his fate, becoming the first person to ever see him as valuable for simply existing. While it's a hopeful moment in this story, survival doesn't always mean healing from scars that refuse to disappear. Tabuki has only buried his pain under the silence and passivity. He hasn't confronted his past. He's accepted a role of quiet obedience to the world, never confronting the system that almost destroyed him. His feelings of resentment towards the system grow worse with the death of Momoka, and that hatred finds itself planted on the best scapegoat available, the living children of the terrorists thought to be responsible for her death. Even as this boy becomes an adult, the scars of abandonment define his choices and steer him towards a path constructed from the roots of anger and hatred, the very thing Momoka stood against. Yuri, by contrast, tries to seize control of her pain. As a child, she endured unspeakable abuse at the hands of her father. The list of his crimes, something I cannot speak of here, all in the hopes that by enduring, she would receive the love her father promised. The man manipulating her to believe that no one could love such an ugly child such as her. No one, that is, but him. However, he doesn't see Yuri as a person with autonomy or emotions. He sees her as an object to be molded, like his sculptures. Someone whose value lies only in her appearance and obedience. His love is disguised ownership, treating his daughter as an art piece that's slowly depreciating like her mother before her. He intends to end her life after his playtime ends, but it's through Momoka's sacrifice, using the diary to change the fate of a girl she saw as a friend, at the cost of scarring her own body. While this act of unconditional love would forever affect Yuri, so too did the scars her father's axe left on her body and her mind. Wounds remain from the traumas layered in our past. We can only decide how they'll shape us moving forward. Unlike Tabuki, Yuri does not suppress her trauma both from her father and from the death of Momoka. Rather, it contorts into her identity. She becomes performative, controlling, and obsessed with recapturing the purity of the connection she once felt. Her career choice mirrors this. Her dive into acting can be taken as a desperate search for validation. On stage, she could finally be seen, admired, even applauded, everything her father's twisted affection inevitably denied her of. The art of acting became a way to reclaim her identity, cast a veil over what she described as her ugliness, and become someone worthy of love in the eyes of others. But behind the spotlight, what she longed for was the pure, unconditional acceptance she once found in Momoka, one person who had seen every part of her and loved every part of her. And in losing her, Yuri lost the one person who saw her not as an object to be perfected, but as someone already worth existence. Her quest to seek validation through the art of theater is hollow and scarring. External validation will never heal her internal wounds. Applause, admiration, and control of her image are but momentary relief that mimic the few words of recognition received from her father. But the ugly side of the industry is just as sharp as the tools he would carve into her body. Her anxieties and trauma shine through in her most raw moments. Her love becomes possessive. Her sense of justice twisted. She may desire to save others from suffering like hers, but she ends up reenacting that same harm in the name of love and in the name of bringing back the one she's lost. For Yuri, she pursues a reincarnation of Momoka through the use of the girl's lost diary that is said to rewrite fate. But she is not alone in her longing. Tabuki and her methods may differ, but they have the same underlying meaning. A desire to ease the internal pain left by trauma. In their fixation on the past, they lost sight of the present, and in doing so, risk becoming the very forces that once hurt them, that once left them unchosen. Their actions, born of grief and longing, repeat the same cycles of harm they themselves only survived through Momoka. Their hate towards the unchosen children of the Takakuras is an antonym to the love Momoka once shared with them. They become pressure cookers of emotional damage, bound to one day act against what their friend would want, motivated by survivor's guilt and desperation for an escape from pain. Momoka's presence may have saved them, but her absence defines them. Like the terrorists that lash out against the world in anger of the systems, this pair would seek their own form of penance for what they claim to be sins. Sins passed down to the next of kin, not something that dies with the assailant, something that becomes the child's duty to atone for. In Japanese society, there existed, and in some terms still exists, a long-standing notion that the sins of the parent are passed down to the child, not just through blood, but through social stigma, shame, inherited burden. This idea, rooted in both traditional values and historical precedent, sees family as an unbroken line where honor and disgrace ripple through generations of the family name. Even if a child is innocent, they may carry the burden of their parents' actions, judged not for who they are, but from where they come from. This unspoken cultural inheritance becomes a quiet, suffocating force, shaping the fates here of a trio of siblings, before they even understand what they've been blamed for. In Penguindrum, society's wrath takes the form of cosmic justice, if you wish to call it that. Fate damning the youngest of the bunch here to an incurable sickness. She suffers not because of who she is and for what she has done, but because of the offenses of her adoptive parents. She's a victim of happenstance. Ironic that the only people who took pity on these unchosen children of society was the Kiga group. Their parents may have committed a terrible crime, but they, as the adopted children, have been chosen to pay for their sins. The Takakura children suffer unjustly for crimes they had no role in committing, because fate is a cruel entity that serves systems unjust in nature. The remnants of the Takakura family name are held together by a bond both fragile and strong. It isn't one shared in blood, but in something far more profound. choice. In a world obsessed with lineage and legacy, Kanba, Shouma, and Himari are tied not by biology, but by the decision to stay, to protect, and to love one another. It's a connection forged in the fires of hardship. Where fate tries to pull them apart, they cling tighter as their family is born out of intention. That choice is what makes their connection powerful, but also painfully fragile. Without blood to bind them, they're always a few steps away from being strangers. Their love is real, but it exists on the edge of uncertainty, constantly tested by the weight of the past and the roles fate demands they play. It's in that tension between chosen love and inherited burden that their story unfolds, as their sister's incurable illness takes her life, and the brothers must bear the weight of fate's ruling, or maybe not in this case. A penguin hat. That is the catalyst for this quest, ridiculous as it is. Within the object is encased a lingering will of Momoka, through which she manifests as the Princess of the Crystal, a commanding and mysterious figure who intervenes in moments of crisis. This persona isn't Momoka herself, but an echo of her desire, a last safeguard left behind to protect those bound by fate. The personality we see in these moments is very much the buried self of Himari, but the words she speaks are the mission passed down to her through destiny itself. The mission Momoka left her is clear: to stop Sanetoshi's ghost from erasing everything in retaliation for the neglect and suffering of the unchosen children. The children have been chosen to serve the purpose that rejects the system that fate upholds, but believes in a possibility of a future without this system, not blazed with mass death. For their contribution to this fight, they're promised a way to save their sister. The hat and the princess herself become symbols of resistance against the destruction found in nihilism, carrying forward Momoka's vow to rewrite fate's cruelty through compassion. That being said, Sanetoshi's quest to seek retribution for society discarding the unchosen children has hints of a tragic hero. He uses trauma as a justification for mass destruction, framing it as justice when it is in fact the replication of the very cruelty he condemns. His charm and calm demeanor mask a philosophy devoid of empathy, one where saving people isn't the goal, but watching the system collapse is. He's a product of a broken world, concluding that the only honest response to such cruelty is cruelty. Yet these words come from a moment of clarity, not malice. His goal holds no personal gain, only liberation achieved through deconstructing the systems in a mass destructive event. The love and sacrifice Momoka represents, in his eyes, is beautiful, but a futile gesture within a system rigged against compassion. From his perspective, trying to fix a world this fundamentally broken is naive. As long as the world continues to feed children into the proverbial child broiler, then isn't annihilating the world the only moral choice? His action in that sense comes off compassionate, but it's a large misstep. He and Momoka see the same pain, they just respond to it with opposite conclusions. So while the narrative poses him as a villain, he's truly a tragic idealist whose loss of faith in humanity sets him down a path of destruction. Sanetoshi is terrifying because he understands the world, and because his hopelessness, if you've suffered enough, can feel dangerously rational. But his philosophy of destruction holds hypocrisy. He believes that destroying the world is a form of justice, a way to free the forgotten and unchosen from a cycle of inherited suffering. But in doing so, he becomes the very thing he despises, a force that discards others without offering them a future. Destruction doesn't heal trauma, it only multiplies it. If the world were to end as he desires, what happens to the children still clinging to hope? To those like Himari, Shouma, Kanba, children already teetering on the edge of abandonment, that have latched onto one another to create a shared sense of belonging. His solution would erase not only the pain, but also the possibility of love, of healing, of rewriting fate through choice and sacrifice. In trying to stop the system that forgets children, Sanetoshi forgets them a second time, choosing oblivion over building a place for the broken. That's what Momoka stands against. That's why she resists. She doesn't ignore the cruelty, but believes there's another answer. To carry the pain on one's own shoulders, without casting it upon others in great flames. To rewrite fate, not with fires, but with love. Sanetoshi's flaw is that he only sees two options: submit to the cruel world or destroy it. What he cannot accept is that there is another path, enduring it for someone else's sake. That's what makes him a compelling villain, not because he's entirely wrong, but because he's tragically incomplete. Thus, Momoka's will sends the Takakura brothers on a mission to obtain the one thing that can stop Tanetoshi and the Kiga group, the symbolic MacGuffin that is the Penguindrum, an object whose value is dependent on what it represents, not what it is. They're given no clarity on what it is they seek, only that through finding this object, they can discover a way to save their sister from death, rewrite her fate, and unburden their family from the sins cast down upon them by society. And the only lead they're given is that the girl named Ringo Oginome is said to hold the object they desire. There's something deeply troubling about Ringo. It could be the fact she's obsessed with fulfilling the destiny left behind by her deceased sister Momoka, outlined in her diary, which she claims to be capable of rewriting fate. But the answer is likely deeper within the layered onion that she is. At first glance, she comes off as someone you wouldn't wish to touch with a 9-foot pole, but Ringo is the Takakura brothers' only lead in saving their sister, so her occasional stalking of their high school teacher must go overlooked. They believe due to this diary's significance to Ringo, it may be the elusive Penguindrum they are searching for. And so, what begins as a desperate search for the object to rewrite fate becomes entangled with Ringo's own delusions, grief, and twisted form of devotion. The brothers must navigate deeper into this wheel of fate that binds all of the players into this game to find the Penguindrum, questioning how far both of them are willing to go for their sister. What moral lines will they cross to succeed? And ultimately, when is it that love ends and obsession begins? Her motivations are sincere. Ringo desires to complete these diary entries of her sister's, delusionally believing that by doing so, she will become her sister, and liberate those around her that she loves from the pain and grief they feel over her sister's death. She has long burdened the weight of the death, having been born the same day Momoka died, hearing her parents divorce over disagreements on how each are handling this grief, and in doing so, ignoring the daughter they still had. Everything that seemed to be destroying their happy little family appeared to be tied to her existence and her sister's non-existence. So she wished to alter fate and bring back her sister, at the cost of the girl that is Ringo. That is her destiny, as she says. But this belief she is doing so out of love is just obligation disguised. It bleeds self-destruction, a response to the absence of love Ringo experiences. Many see her as an after-image of her sister, not for the girl that she is. They speak so highly of Momoka, leaving no space for Ringo to be appreciated. Thus, this choice to become Momoka is a desperate attempt to feel worthy, chosen, and loved. Ringo lives in the shadow, but Momoka, she was treated like an object of worship by so many. Her journey is a tragic reflection of how children respond to emotional neglect. They don't stop seeking love. They just contort themselves into whatever shape they think might be loved in return. It's a survival mechanism that comes with a steep psychological cost. Emotional repression disguised as the payment to pursue destiny, creating distorted relationships with harmful dynamics, and a loss of identity created in the instability of the self. Everything about the Ringo we are introduced to reeks as artificial and performative. In real-world psychology, this is akin to the idea of fawning, a trauma response where someone does such acts as these to secure affection and safety. Over time, this erodes self-worth and makes healthy relationships difficult because the person is never sure whether they're loved for who they are or who they pretended to be. But Ringo tells herself she is fine with this as long as her parents and Tabuki are happy. But while these claims may sound as expressions of devotion, underneath they're justifications to pursue an identity they all love. Ringo believes that as herself, she is unworthy of their love, destined to become unchosen, a leftover child from a broken family. So she clings to this idea that by completing her sister's fate, by becoming Momoka, she can repair her family, gain affection, and validate her existence through sacrifice. It's a win-win, just not for the identity that is Ringo. She must disappear. This is what makes her journey so emotionally raw. It captures a very human tendency. When we've been neglected or feel unlovable, we often chase love through roles, performances, and martyrdom. We say it's for others, but deep down, it's a cry for recognition. Please choose me. Please see me. But her destiny faces overwhelming hurdles. It will not be realized. Yet she continues to live in these delusions that are only broken by the one who has the patience to put up with her sharp tongue and fragile mental state, Shouma. while his brother Kanba works mostly in the background, supplying the family with money for the house and for Himari's medical payments. The source of this cash we do not know. Shouma was put on Ringo duty, told to just take the diary from her, but his morals call him to do otherwise. Instead, he's patient with Ringo, doing everything at her beck and call at the promise she will lend him the diary to save his sister once she's completed her duty. But in the end, she gives up on her quest for destiny after coming to realize the ugly truth of her motivations. This wasn't about fulfilling destiny or about bringing back the object of grief of others. It was always about herself, about trying to fill the emptiness left by neglect and abandonment. After drugging Tabuki and finally coming close to fulfilling the goal of Project M, Ringo is given clarity around her pursuits of the man. And this was never about love, but an attempt to resurrect the fantasy where she could feel chosen and special, like the princess in her daydreams. Loved by all, the center of attention and affection. Her plan to have his child becomes an absurd, dangerous reflection of that delusion. But as she confronts rejection and sees how her actions hurt others, especially herself, she wakes up to how hollow her version of love has become, and she realizes where her love truly lies. As she had spent more time with Shouma, someone who genuinely sees her rather than her sister, she begins to develop a more authentic, mutual bond, helping her realize that she can be loved as Ringo without needing to perform or inherit someone else's identity. It's not per se romantic love that saves her, but recognition and emotional honesty found in a boy in her life. And so she leaves behind the destiny she spoke of in pursuit of a fate for Ringo, not Momoka. She decides to give Shouma the diary, only at that very moment half becomes stolen, leading Ringo to wander aimlessly into the street in shock. Shouma throwing himself in the way of a truck to save her from being hit, leading to a heavy shift in the tone of this narrative. The roles of Tabuki and Yuri become more relative with the exposure of what exactly has motivated Ringo to pursue such a delusional fantasy, that being the death of her sister and the very attack the Takakura parents took part in. This launches Shouma into a spiral of guilt and shame he had initially compartmentalized and hid from. Realizing the weight of sin committed by his family has even reached the one friend he's made. This shame makes him push away Ringo, as the boy believes he doesn't deserve to be loved, even in the confines of friendship. He sees himself as tainted by his origins, like he's a product of the evil his parents committed. Anyone who chooses to love him is making a mistake. That's the belief he holds. But we'll save the rest of his analysis for later. The focus here is on the two adults that have persevered the child broiler, carried on with the weight of grief from losing their greatest love, and yet never found a way to make peace. Yuri is the first to make a move. Her story is one of how trauma, when left unresolved, can twist the meaning of love itself. Her actions towards Ringo aren't rooted in cruelty, but in a fractured understanding of care, shaped by the belief that to love is to possess and to reshape. Momoka was Yuri's savior, Christ-like and all, but this pedestal leads to unhealthy obsession. That Momoka is larger than life, and in fact, not dead, but capable of being brought back, like in the Second Coming. The kind of salvation she experienced is simply love in its most true form, but to her, Momoka's love is one of a kind. There's only one source of this feeling, and instead of mourning and moving forward, Yuri fixates on resurrecting the source of that feeling, that version of security and warmth. Momoka becomes an ideal in her head, not a person. This makes Ringo's physical appearance and the concept that the diary can change fate a perfect target for Yuri's emotional delusions, recreating Momoka through Ringo. But that is not love as she believes it to be. It's control, something many abuse victims can mistake for love, since that is how affection occasionally was modeled to them as a child. Despite the years that have passed, she cannot escape those days with her father and the trauma inflicted upon her. Thus, she inflicts the very same harm that her father did to her body onto Ringo. It's a haunting example of the cycle of abuse, repeating the very harm one once endured, not out of malice, but as a broken attempt to fill the void left behind. Thankfully, her conscience speaks up and stops her before full commitment. It's a moment deliberately meant to expose the full extent of what happens when trauma is left to fester, when love becomes obsession, and when the pain of the past is mistaken for a script to follow. Yuri isn't driven here by a desire in a conventional sense. She's reenacting a dynamic she never escaped. Her understanding of affection has been warped. To her, love is possession and control, and Ringo, in Yuri's eyes, is a vessel for Momoka, like the sculptures of her father. She's not her own person. Her emotions cause her to become what she once feared, the show never romanticizing her actions of assault. They, in turn, become the breaking point in Yuri's arc, the moment she must confront the fact that her obsession is leading her down a path to become her father. Only by stepping away from her delusions, by letting go of the past, can she begin to reclaim a part of herself that isn't defined by her child abuse. And it's in that mirror of horror the narrative asks, will you pass your wounds onto others, or stop the cycle before it repeats? She saw in herself the truth, that if she was to do this to Ringo, she would only be contributing to the cycle of displaced, broken children that Momoka seeks to end. Her actions are not for the one she loves, they're against everything she stood for, and so she stops. She leaves Ringo with Shouma, and stops chasing a way to rewrite the past. As for Tabuki, what he sought was never a way to alter fate, but payment for what fate has allowed to happen. He becomes a vessel for the society that refuses to forgive, casting its inherited sins onto the children of the damned. What remains of the boy saved from the child broiler by Momoka is a man defined by repression and boiling anger. His trauma lingers unspoken, calcified beneath a polished smile and a career as a teacher. Tabuki doesn't see the Takakura children as people. They're objects of sin, the after-image of the people society never punished, for they are long dead. So he assumes the role of judge, jury, and executioner, directing his unresolved pain onto those least deserving of it. They already fight the fates that have damned their sister to death, and the shame from their parents' actions. Yet Tabuki seeks self-serving vengeance, not true justice. He becomes exactly what the show critiques, a victim of trauma who, instead of seeing the unfair damage the cycle cast on these children, decides it's not enough. He continues to feed the fire, his motivations framed by a subconscious belief that the children of sinners must pay because someone should. In this, he becomes not just an individual acting out of grief, but a reflection of a larger societal sickness, the urge to condemn, to project, and to seek resolution through punishment rather than understanding. But by forcing Kanba into a scenario where someone must be punished, either he or Himari, he creates a symbolic gauntlet, a test of Kanba's willingness to protect the one he loves through sacrifice, as well as a punishment to uphold the karmic burden passed down upon his family. It's a perverse test. Tabuki, a man broken by the sins of the past, is now demanding payment. It doesn't matter the person, just that someone suffers. What the man constructs is a false moral economy, where inherited sin demands blood payment. It's an act of emotional sadism. He disguises it as justice, yet Kanba buys in. While the system is unfair and wrong, he believes that this is the reality of their world. Someone must pay the toll, and for him, the choice is obvious. His willingness to endure Tabuki's punishment is yet another stone laid on his own path towards self-destruction. Throughout, Kanba has taken the role of the protector, but his version of protection sacrifices the self, devoid of a clear moral road. He doesn't just love Himari, he's obsessed with preserving her, to the point of surrendering everything else. His body, his morals, his identity. Himari's illness is the physical symbol of their family's inherited fate, the punishment society inflicts on the Takakura children. And Kanba sees this pain not just as a random misfortune, but as a burden he wishes to bear. In his mind, if he can suffer enough, bleed enough, sacrifice enough, maybe he can erase their debt. Maybe he can rewrite the story fate has cursed them with. So sure, he would sacrifice his arm, his leg, his life, if it meant his sister would breathe for just one more moment. But that sacrifice isn't of equal value. If he wishes to give himself to fate in her stead, he must first learn to value and see his life as equal to his sister's. That is the rule of equivalent exchange that fate follows. There's a tragedy to his conviction, because what he's truly sacrificing is his agency, his future, and in a deeper sense, his humanity. He's a slave to obsession. His love for Himari, while powerful, becomes a mask for his desperation and lack of value in himself. She's not just his sister, she's his symbol of purity, Choosing to let himself be broken rather than let her fall is just another form of destruction on his long road of self-harm. Kanba wishes to be used to burn himself out in a great flame by shielding Himari from fate, the internalized voice of a society that has convinced him they were born to pay for someone else's sins. He attempts to become a martyr not because the world needs one, but because the world taught him that was the only way he could experience love once again. This is a double bind, a psychological trap. There is no winning choice here. It's a reflection of how society often presents the vulnerable with lose-lose scenarios. Suffer quietly, or lash out and be punished. Kanba's pain is the result of a world that believes punishment purifies, that justice can be served by proxy. And so in this moment, Penguindrum lays bare a harsh truth. When society refuses to address its own failures, it pushes that burden onto the next generation, until someone finally chooses to carry it out of love and not hate. Tabuki does not choose that path of love right away. Instead, after witnessing the lengths Kanba would go to for another, he's forced to reckon with the fact that he is contributing, just like Yuri, to the same trauma and abuse that led him to the child broiler. These children in front of him have already experienced pain equivalent to his own. They too were left unchosen, yet the three bound themselves together, just as Tabuki, Momoka, and Yuri did. Yet here he is attempting to tear them down, punish them for his own grief and hatred he's left unprocessed. He's no better here than his mother, who abused and cast him aside. It makes him sick. This is not what Momoka would have wanted. Just like Yuri, what he had thought he was doing out of love for his lost friend, a quest for vengeance and retribution, was just a way of serving the void left in his heart. He chooses here to carry that weight forward rather than casting it upon others. Chooses to save Himari from sacrificing herself to end the pain that Kanba is burdening for her, and chooses to remove himself from the picture altogether. Trauma rarely ends with the person who suffers it. That is one of its cruelest truths. In many cases, abuse becomes cyclical, not by intention, but by the absence of healing. A child raised in pain often grows into an adult who, without their resolution, unconsciously mirrors that pain onto others. This is not always out of malice, but from a distorted understanding of love, control, or self-worth, learned in a broken environment. The cycle continues, generation after generation, until someone chooses to confront it, not with more harm, but with compassion, awareness, and the courage to break the pattern. Yuri and Tabuki were able to break free, though not without first inflicting remnants of their abuse onto the next generation. Their path is messy, but there is hope they can leave the past behind and find the love Momoka left within each other. Their trauma is shared. Their bond, in this sense, becomes strong. There is no need to chase the dead by inflicting pain on others, for they have their own demons to wrestle with. That is where this pair's story ends, not with a definitive happy ending, but with a promise to mourn together, grow together, and share their lives with one another, not as lovers, but as partners. Where once they thought no one knew their pain, they found another, capable of reciprocating their sorrow. I've waited till now to focus on the members of the Takakura family, as their true character never shows through the curtains until late into the quest for the Penguindrum. Himari specifically goes through the entirety of the series, hiding her true self behind a mask created out of the courtesy for her brothers and their sacrifice for her sake. They've done so much on her behalf to make her happy, to attempt to save her life. Her inner turmoil would just be another thing they'd burden themselves with. She's wholeheartedly aware of Kanba's deep-rooted obsession with her and Shouma's extreme burden of guilt, but she doesn't confront them about these unhealthy weights they carry, because she feels it's her job not to burden them more. She plays the kind and happy sister that dawdles on her two brothers. It does not matter that none of them are related by blood, because what binds them is shared trauma and a desire to be loved. Shared trauma forges a bond unlike any other. Not because it's healthy, but because it is deeply understood. When two people have felt the same kind of pain, they recognize it in each other without needing words. There's an unspoken intimacy in surviving something no one else can fully grasp. It creates a connection rooted in vulnerability, empathy, and the desperate need not to be alone in the aftermath. Though born from suffering, this bond can become a lifeline, a fragile but powerful reminder that healing doesn't have to happen and isolation. But not all bonds born from pain lead to healing. Another far more dangerous connection can form through the desperate desire to be loved and needed. When someone has been starved of affection or validation, they may cling to any relationship that promises meaning, even if it's hollow, harmful, or built on illusion. This kind of attachment isn't about mutual care. It's about filling a void, and in the pursuit of that feeling, people may lose themselves, reshape their identity, or endure suffering just to avoid being alone again. It's not love, it's survival disguised as connection. This describes Himari's internal world with painful accuracy. Beneath her gentle demeanor and bright smile is a girl who is discarded by the world and clings desperately to the love she's been given. Even if that love demands she disappears, only to show her true self and the identity that is the Crystal Princess. All three of the Takekuras experience the child broiler before meeting one another. They all know what it's like to be the unchosen child, to be derived from parental love, of acknowledgement that you deserve to exist. Yet Himari sees herself as someone who was chosen after being abandoned, which makes her someone who must earn her place in the family. She tries to be the glue that holds them together, even if it means silencing her own needs. Her quiet acceptance of Kanba's obsession and Shouma's guilt reflects this, a belief that her worth lies in how deeply others need her, not in who she is. She fears that without this role as glue, she'll vanish again, so she pretends not to see the red flags in their relationships. Himari's love is real, but it's tangled in the same survival mechanisms of fawning as Ringo's. If I am needed, I won't be left behind. Yet the consequences stand. She deep down is afraid she was chosen not from love, but for the role she wears. And their adoptive parents disappearing after the terrorist attacks creates that worry that their familial bond is a charade, a family in name only, held together by shared loneliness rather than actual family ties. What little sense of belonging they had is shattered, and with it, the stability they clung to. In that absence, the idea of family becomes something sacred, not because it's strong, but because it's fragile. A thread they each become terrified to see snapped. And so they overcompensate. Kanba becomes fiercely protective, even obsessive, willing to destroy himself or the world to keep what's left intact. Shouma tries to bear the guilt of it all alone, hoping that by quietly atoning, he can hold everyone together. Himari, abandoned once and chosen only by chance, fears being discarded again, so she tries to be small, gentle, lovable, anything but a liability. They're not just protecting each other, they're desperately defending the illusion that they still belong to the same name. Because if they lose that, they fear they will all go back to being strangers in each other's life. This is all they have, which is why the brothers appear so desperate over the course of the story, and Himari attempts to do everything not to inconvenience the others. Therein lies the irony of her sickness. The very thing Himari fears most becomes the role she's fated to fulfill. She wants nothing more than to be the glue that holds them together, to be worth the love she was given, but fate curses her with a terminal illness, amplifying her deepest insecurity. She becomes more dependent, more fragile, and in her eyes, more of a weight. To survive, her brothers must make impossible choices. They sacrifice, lie, bleed, all for her. And though they do it out of love, to Himari, every act of desperation risks confirming her worst fear, that she is an obligation pulling them under. That they will once more become unchosen, Shouma sinking into despair, Kanba into the same path of their parents, one ridden with bad decisions coming from anger and frustration with the world. It's a cruel trick of fate, assigning her a role as the one bound by sin, one that contradicts everything she tries to be, and trying so hard not to cause them trouble. She becomes one through no fault of her own. It's fate weaponized, and it's precisely why the cycle of inherited sin and indifference to child suffering must be banished from our godforsaken world. And no matter how much they wish to change fate, no matter how much they wish to both suffer in her stead, Himari cannot be cured. Her illness is propelled forward by the karmic punishment of passed down sins that were never hers to begin with. And no amount of love, protection, or violence seems enough to erase that mark, because that is what society has decided upon. This is what breaks Shouma the most, because he's the one who still holds a conscience, the one most haunted by the sins of their parents. Unlike Kanba, he doesn't choose to lash out, but as Himari's condition worsens, the futility becomes clearer. They cannot save her. Not through guilt, not through kindness, not even in self-sacrifice. And in that realization is the tragedy, that love alone isn't always enough to undo what fate has decided, but it may be enough to change what lies next. Shouma began this journey passive and moral, standing apart from his siblings in a subtle but defining way. The kind of person who avoids conflict not out of cowardice, but out of a desire not to hurt anyone. A vow likely taken due to the guilt compartmentalized of his parents' deeds. But this detachment begins to unravel the moment he meets Ringo. Through their strange partnership, a genuine connection forms, and with it, the devastating truth that his parents played a role in her sister's death. His family is responsible for the trauma that encases Ringo, and thus, like he has always done, he attempts to carry that burden for the hope it will not reach his brother and sister. He longs for martyrdom, to be the source of people's hate for their family, becoming an emotional shield for the other two. Where Kanba attempts to act for his family's sake, Shouma chooses inaction, propping himself up against the arrows that seek to strike the children in the name of retribution. This desire for penance is amplified after hearing of Momoko's death, leading to his belief that he is not worth Ringo's affection or friendship. He is, after all, in his eyes, the source of her trauma. But it's here that his morality is truly tested, and where his journey towards true self-understanding begins. Shouma's self-loathing and repayment of his parents' sin is undone by Ringo's grace, her love and belief in him, her refusal to do what no one else has done for him or his siblings, to not treat them as an extension of their lineage. Shouma is not defined by fate. He's defined by his own personal actions. That is the belief he at first lacks. Martyrdom, while often seen as noble, can be incredibly dangerous, especially when it becomes a reflex rather than a conscious choice. It favors us self-destruction over self-worth, framing suffering as the only path to redemption or love. And in doing so, it rejects the idea that one is inherently deserving of life, happiness, and healing. When someone constantly sacrifices themselves to erase the pain of others, or to atone for things they didn't choose, they stop acting from a place of wholeness and begin living as if their existence is a debt to be repaid to humanity. It creates a warped belief that only through erasure of desire, of self, of being, can the karmic debt be repaid. But true healing and change don't come from erasing oneself. They come from choosing to live, not as a shadow of past sins, but as a person capable of love, growth, and forward motion. Martyrdom clings to the past. Self-worth builds the future. He had long chosen to not cede his beliefs forward, but freezing the pain of the past. What prevents him from saving his sister from fate's inherited sin is his belief his life is not equal to hers, and in the belief that they, as a familial unit, must bear their parents' penance. He buys into the system just as Kanba does. He doesn't think there exists a world without it. But what Ringo was able to introduce to him was affirmation that he deserved life. His siblings deserved life, and they should live with that in mind. Thus, Shouma accepts that the cycle of hate will surround their lives, that this is the reality of their fate, but he can choose not to give it power over his agency, over his ability to do something about it. Both he and his brother reject the system, but each of them have a different approach to this rejection. Shouma, over the course of the story, comes to the understanding that some things cannot be controlled, fixed, or reversed, that fate, pain, and even death are part of life. He recognizes that love doesn't mean saving someone at all cost, but being present, compassionate, and selfless, even when you can't change the outcome. His journey is one of emotional maturity, confronting guilt, letting go of the need to undo the past, and embracing the pain of impermanence. Kanba, on the other hand, refuses to let go. His entire identity becomes bound to protecting Himari to the point of obsession. His love, while sincere, is reactive and desperate, a refusal to accept that something so precious to him could be taken away. Because of this, he turns to any means necessary, a futile attempt to cheat fate. He doesn't grieve, he fights back reality. So while Shouma's arc leads to transformation, Kanba's is one of denial. The tragedy is that both love her deeply, but only Shouma comes to understand that true love isn't about clinging to someone, it's about freeing them, even if it breaks you. That's why Shouma can hold her fate with open hands, while Kanba crushes it trying to preserve her memory. This inevitably leads to the brothers' conflict, as Shouma finally chooses to step in and do something about Kanba's self-destruction. It's a clash of ideologies Kanba does not take well, as the two represent different reactions to abandonment, yet each is tied to one another by a shared bond of fate, a shared trauma. a shared purpose, a shared love, all that takes on the shape of an apple. Before any diary, before the penguin hat, before the desperate race against death, there lied a choice and a metaphysical memory from childhood. Kanba and Shouma stand in prison separately, alone and starving, while on the brink of death, before one of them appears a mysterious symbolic fruit, the fruit of fate. Its appearance to one of them marks the individual as chosen, the one without, damned to the fate of the child broiler, bound to disappear from existence. But Kanba does not allow for this to happen. He shares his fruit with Shouma, binding them together by a shared fate. Whatever lies next for one of them, lies too with the other. This is their origin story of how two souls became bound by a decision to share in another's pain. But what exactly does this mean? The fruit of fate is not a magical object, it's a metaphor, a representation of taking on the karmic weight of someone else's suffering. In this case, a vow made between two individuals to share in the burdens and joys of life together. Kanba didn't have to reach out to Shouma, but he did, and in doing so, made themselves responsible for the life of the other. They chose to become brothers, just as they choose to become Himaris. It's a bond greater than blood. It's a beautiful act, but also a tragic one, because from that moment on, their lives are no longer just theirs. Every action they take, every sacrifice, every sin, is shaped by this binding choice. Kanba responds by doubling down, trying to conquer fate by force. Shouma responds by eventually accepting that not every pain can be shared, but both are reacting to the same event, the shared sins of a family, the choice of bound fellowship. Kanba copes by becoming a mirror of his parents, the very people who chose to answer a broken world with destruction. In his desperation to save Himari, he begins to emulate the same tactics of coercion, violence, and secrecy by once more aligning himself with the Kika group. He becomes misguided, doing these acts against the wishes of his sister, as behind this rebellion is not hope, it's nihilism. The world took someone innocent, so he must burn it down before it takes her again. This is the response he ends at when confronting his brother, manipulated to Sanetoshi's will after the man who has posed as their doctor has informed the boy there is nothing left he can do to save his sister. Nothing, that is, except for siding with him. Both boys begin their journey as halves of a whole. Kanba has action, but he lacks introspection. Shouma has introspection, but he lacks the ability to act. While Shouma found his voice in a reason to stand up against cruelty, stand up against his brother, Kanba was consumed and fed the system of fate that had judged their family as sin-bound. He repeats the events of his parents with yet another terrorist attack, this one much larger in scale and without Momoko's diary to prevent it. The number of lives lost is sure to exceed thousands. But the rewrite of fate never lied specifically in the book. It lied in the words of a determined girl, which is a moment that can still be replicated. There are those who still wish to save this world and change it through compassion and love, not violence and terror. One such actor is Masako Natsume, separated when their father took Kanba with him into the terrorist organization, leaving Masako and her frail younger brother Mario behind. Two children discarded in different forms of the same system, one remaining with her grandfather and radicalized, the other forgotten and left to survive alone. Masako grows up in a world defined by power and powerlessness. Her brother Mario suffers from a mysterious illness, much like Himari, and she inherits the same crushing obligation Kanba feels, to protect a loved one no matter the cost. But her response is more calculated, a product of the home she was left to, the supposed safety net, which is far from healing. Her grandfather, a wealthy and powerful figure, surrounds himself with tradition, wealth, and formality. He teaches Masako control and power are what makes one strong. He distances himself from emotion, settling in the collection of material and rejection of emotional ties, commanding rather than comforting. His influence represents a different kind of harm, not direct abuse, but the cold indifference of institutional power. Where the terrorists reacted to the system with emotional despair, the grandfather perpetuates it through complacency. He may not pay heed to the pain inflicted by these inherited systems, but he upholds the structure, expecting duty, perfection, and results, ignoring the emotional cost of what they do. And he pressures Masako to follow in his footsteps through seizing one's desires with manipulation, control, and strength, which she replicates in trying to bring her twin brother home. But her pursuit to bring Kanba back is not just out of a desire to reunite the family, but to prevent history from repeating itself. She sees the same obsession that once consumed their father now rising within her brother. Mario's sickness was likely a motivator for their dad to join Kiga, and his slip into nihilism and destructive anger became something her grandfather would see as a weakness and fortitude. To lose Kanba to the same darkness, to watch him become their father's shadow, is a fate Masako cannot accept. Her methods are severe, yes, because to her this isn't a battle of ideology. It's a personal, emotional war for her twin soul. She doesn't want to save the world, she only wishes to save him, which makes her the female parallel to Kanba, both victims of a legacy of destruction, both obsessed with saving someone they love, and both willing to manipulate, deceive, or harm in the name of that love. Only their objects of desire do not co-align. Because of his abandonment, Kanba holds not onto the bonds of blood, but of shared trauma and desperation for love. His father's decision to leave him in death or neglect likely caused some rejection of all his past family, leading to apathy for his twin sister and an aggressive approach to protect his new one. Himari is a chosen love forged through survival of some of the worst things imaginable. She also is a person dependent on him to continue living, fragile and sick. By protecting someone like this, he reclaims purpose, a sense of meaning, and of being needed. He alone will save the family, not through burdening the inherited sin like his brother, but by acting and establishing a way for them to continue to exist. Kanba's aversion to Masako is out of what she represents, his childhood trauma, and an abandoned family that threatens the validity of his new one. For someone averse to thinking about moral implications and coping with trauma, Kanba could not hope to reconnect with his sister. He cares about her, but the care is locked away with the rest of his history he shuns to the back of his mind. He distracts himself from these kinds of pains by pursuing a fate where Himari doesn't die. It's his coping mechanism, which is exactly what Masako attempts to stop, even if, like her brother, it costs her everything in turn. Masako represents obsessive protection, even putting herself in harm's way after her brother begins committing car bombings. Kanba represents obsessive devotion, sacrificing all for the symbol Himari represents, of the pure that are rejected by society. Neither is free, both want to save, but cannot let go. Masako's final act in the story of distracting the police while Kanba is saved is an alteration of motivation that shifts her into a more healthy form of love. She comes to the realization she cannot force her brother to change, but she can still choose how she uses her life in trying to save him from his terrible fate. This, to her, is in sacrificing her own life in her brother's stead, and sending the message to him that whether he sees her as his sister or not, he will always be her brother. It's the beginning of the cracks in Kanba's emotional cage, a realization that the path he walks comes at the sacrifice of all he holds dear. How would this be something Himari would want for him? Beating Shouma, allowing his sister to be killed, only to be resurrected by a shady figure that promises death will bring rebirth. Firebombing Ringo alongside the diary, killing innocents to feed his rage. He is no more than a monster creating another cycle of hate for fate to puppeteer. He's extending its length, its suffering, its victims. How many children has he left without fathers, mothers from his actions so far? How many bonds has he permanently scarred? All of these conflicts of the self rear their ugly head in the final test of his character, boarding the train of destiny alongside Sanetoshi, the now dead Himari. They set down the path said to bring forth a world where Himari lives, a track made through the countless deaths of innocents soon to perish at the hands of Kika's teddy bombs. Destiny's train symbolizes the inevitability that humanity will be the end of humanity. Our actions of neglect, of apathy to one another, of allowing for children to grow unchosen, victims of abuse, people who have never experienced love or affection. Such things will lead to our demise. It will create the systems and cycles controlled by fate that people like Kanba become stuck within. But Shouma stands as a challenge to his brother's ideology. Despite the beatings, the rejections, he stands before Kanba stronger than ever, more than willing to die if it means bringing the brother lost in his violence back to the light. Kanba is only a lost cause when you give up on him. Shouma is not willing to do that for one who is bound to him by the fruit of fate they partook in. Their destiny is shared. The expressed here today, will not take them to Sanetoshi's idealized destruction, but to the destiny that has always been laid out for the two of them. The revelation of love unconditionally, the shattering of the cycle of suffering fate cursed them with. It was cursed upon them at birth, but it does not mean they must bear it into death. The Penguindrum was never an object to seek. It was a quest to define oneself and align your heart's desires with your actions. Kanba stands at a crossroads, caught between two fates. One path binds him to his brother, choosing to face the pain of their inheritance with love and sacrifice together as one. The other tempts him to repeat the cycle of vengeance, walking the same path their parents did in anger and despair. In this moment, he must decide to heal the wound left by fate or deepen it by becoming another link in the unbroken chain of sin. But he has always known his decision, as it was destined the moment they shared the apple. Their love is not something he can forsake, no matter how hard he attempts to distance himself from Shouma. In his blind hatred, he had become the very nihilism that had left his family on the brink of destruction, believing it was in the best interest that he become the villain, cast out himself, for he thought it would allow Himari and Shouma to continue living. But in the end, it was Shouma's refusal to let their bond die that kept their family together. His insistence on bearing the weight together, that is what rekindles their unity. They did always have the same goal after all, save their sister. And to do that, they needed not hate or burden, only love without condition, sacrifice that expects nothing in return. In choosing to remember and act on that love, they discovered the true Penguindrum. It wasn't a book of fate, it was an act of sacrifice. Himari is given the gift of life by the will of those who chose to defy the unfair reality bestowed upon them through the sacrifice of their existence. They dismantle the karmic systems that sought to punish them and other children born to cruel fates, proving that even the cruelest stories can end differently when rewritten with love. Kanba's terrorism is prevented thanks to Ringo's recollection of the spell that can alter fate. Her sister's favorite words, "Let us share in the fruit of fate." It is through the spell that fate is altered not by force, but by choosing to bear what another cannot. But the cost of rewriting destiny was never free. The burden is placed upon her like her sister, fate attempting to burn her life away. It's cruel, like the ideas of alchemy. Fate demands an equal exchange, salvation for some at the sacrifice of others. But that sacrifice can still be transferred. It is Shouma who steps forward. He takes upon himself this burden, alongside his sister's death sentence, showing Ringo the same unconditional love he shares with Himari. He accepts fate fully, not because he believes it to be just, but because it's an entity that this cruel world will always brandish. Shouma vanishes alongside his brother into the nothingness that awaits those that sacrifice their lives for another. Able to now make the exchange after they both came to the realization their lives had equal value to the ones they wished to save. And so, fate has its victims. And while it may seem unjust that someone must always pay the price, such is the world we live in. Shouma and Kanba showed us we are not powerless. We can choose to resist the systems that breed cruelty, not through vengeance, not through destruction, but with love and sacrifice. That is the quiet rebellion, the one that rewrites fate. No good has ever come from harming another. Even in our darkest tragedies, it is love that lights the way forward. Vengeance may promise justice, but all it truly delivers is an unending chain of sorrow, a fate far crueler than the one we sought to escape. Shouma knew that, and Kanba realized that. Their stories end, but their message continues forward within the ones saved. All arcs spiral back to a central truth. The cycles of trauma, abandonment, and inherited suffering don't end through vengeance or force. They end when someone chooses to bear that weight without demanding compensation. This is not a story of heroes conquering fate through power, but of ordinary people choosing love in the face of a world that breeds despair. Fate in this narrative is not a spell to be undone or a curse to be broken with brute strength. It's a societal scar, passed down generation after generation, and the only force strong enough to challenge it is selfless sacrifice. Those who vanish without reward, who give so others may live unburdened. The quiet revolutionaries that more often than not go silently into the night without recognition. We speak often of military generals and the feats of war, but far too little of those who chose the quieter path, one of peace, of compassion, of dropping the sword so others may live to see another day. Through them, fate is redefined, not by blood, but by the bonds we chose and the pain we dare to carry for one another. It's not an act that leads to the end of all suffering. That is a battle that is never won. The brothers knew that, so does Momoka, and the one who represents this undying desire for destruction. The final exchange between Sanetoshi and Momoka crystallizes this dichotomy. The man warned that there will come a time once again, signifying his belief that society will continue to produce broken people like him, and that destruction will always return as long as this system exists. But so too does the counterforce Momoka's ambition represented. She will always return as a guide to those who crave love, not violence. Their departure is a promise, a spiritual vow that as long as there are those who suffer, there will always be those who choose to love instead of destroy, as well as those who choose destruction over grace. The train of destiny will always run, carrying the pain of the forgotten, the unchosen. But others can intervene. Their battle will never end. It will loop, like trauma itself, as does resistance. Humanity's downfall is not some external cataclysm, but an internal rot. It's an inevitable result of generations turning away from pain they find uncomfortable to confront. Child abuse, abandonment, poverty, systematic neglect. When society averts its eyes from its failures, that darkness metasizes into resentment, isolation, and eventually radicalism. Mawadu Penguindrum warns us, the only thing that separates an average citizen from a terrorist is the threshold of suffering, and the moment one decides violence is the only language left. The characters are not exceptions to this rule, they are proof of it. Each walks a razor-thin edge between sacrifice and destruction, love and annihilation. The question is not whether fate will bring about more pain, but whether someone will choose to intervene, to love instead of lash out. Because if no one does, the train will continue to run, its destination always the same, the end of humanity in body, but first in spirit. As the journey of the brothers bound by fate ends, it becomes clear the true villains were never Sanetoshi or the Kiga group. They are the echoes of something far more ordinary, our greed, our ignorance, our cowardness in the face of uncomfortable truths. To choose convenience over compassion is the first stop of the Destiny Express, bounding towards humanity's end. In doing so, we create the very monsters we claim to fear. Sanetoshi is not a madman conjured from fiction. He is a logical conclusion of a world where love fails to arrive on time. The child broiler is not a fantasy. It is a metaphor for our world. Every child passed over becomes a potential vessel of destruction by nurture denied. The world doesn't fall apart all at once. It is chipped away by 1,000 acts of neglect, 1,000 forgotten people. But that is fate, some may say, watching as children struggle in situations we allowed to transpire. But fate is not a god to be feared. It is a system built by human hands. Fate feels inevitable, not because it's divine, but because it's systematic. It's written in policies, prejudice, and inherited pain, things we give purpose and names. We are born to fill labels, child of a terrorist, neglected girl, forgotten son, and society expects us to live by those roles. We're forced to fulfill those that we are assigned, to carry the burdens we didn't deserve. Why? Because it's easier to contribute to the cycle than to fix the broken. Because when a system fails, it demands a scapegoat, not the self-awareness to look inward and question the morality of the situation. In an unfair world, you are expected to wear the sins of your blood, to become the villain, the victim, or the void. But every action we take carries weight, and every choice, to forgive, to fight, or disappear, echoes across the fates. Fate is only unchanging when we stop questioning it. But if we bear the weight consciously, if we choose compassion over compliance, and even the heaviest fates can be rewritten. Fate may shape the tracks beneath our feet, but it is love, not vengeance, that changes the direction of the train. The sins of the father are not the burden of the son. The scars of the past do not have to be passed on. The pain inflicted by a few does not define the many. And in a world so quick to judge, to discard, to repeat, The greatest rebellion one can make is compassion. There is power in love that you're often told to ignore. Hate will give you an enemy and offer you hollow justification, but compassion gives you clarity. And while love may not fix the world overnight, it plants the seed for a future where no child is born into condemnation, where fate is not the penance of sin, but a story capable of being rewritten. Choose love. Choose to carry the weight without passing it on. That is how fate is changed. That is how cycles end. You will never be able to change the past, but you will always have the choice to carry your pain and others with love instead of vengeance into the future.